Hi, Acadiana. Meteorologist Dave Baker here on a Monday. Hopefully, you all had a nice 4th of July weekend. I know some of us got the sunny and hot weather, others of us got some good tropical downpours to go along with it. I don't know about you, but I had a couple of pretty good downpours here over the weekend. One on Saturday afternoon that put down about a half an inch of rain at my house. Then yesterday had one fire up and just kind of hold in the same place and picked up a quick 2.5 inches of rain. So I got 3 inches of rain over the 4th of July weekend. If you got some interesting rainfall totals, let me know in the chat or in the comments if you're watching later on. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those thunderstorms that are already ongoing here in Acadiana and how some of those could be some decent rainfall producers. Plus, of course, we're going to look at the remnants of Chantal and look for anything else that's out in the tropics and kind of give you a gauge on where we are for hurricane season compared to normal as we start to roll through the month of July. 90 degrees outside. I have partly cloudy skies here at my house, but I can kind of hear some thunder off in the distance. That dew point is at 73, so humidity levels have been running there up to about 59%. So it is very warm and muggy out there. And as we look outside, most of our traffic cams locally are showing partly cloudy skies, it looks like, and a decent afternoon to get started here along, at least along the I-10 corridor. And then elsewhere along the Gulf Coast, another busy day. Some folks stretching out their 4th of July holiday weekend a little bit longer there on Orange Beach. Pretty day on Dauphin Island as well with partly cloudy skies. You do start to run into a little more cloud cover along the coast there in Mississippi and particularly there over toward Cocodrie. I've seen a few showers on the Lumcon cam there along the coast there in the southern part of Louisiana. And then going out to the west, you can see some showers and thunderstorms developing out in the distance there offshore of Galveston, Texas. So as we look at our local radar here, you can see that we've got quite a few showers and thunderstorms that are developing. Bit of an outflow boundary, some juicy tropical moisture out there, but there's not a lot of steering currents. So what you're seeing here with a lot of these thunderstorms, there's not, except for on some of those outflow boundaries, there's not a lot of movement associated with these storms. And the reason is you don't have a lot of steering currents farther up in the atmosphere. And when we look at the sounding that's there, and this is basically what a weather balloon would see, but this is this is from a forecast model, but rather than looking at the moisture and the temperature and all that, what I wanted you to focus on is this area right over here. You see those wind speeds on the right-hand side going up into the atmosphere. Now, this is the mid-levels of the atmosphere here, so you still have some very light winds. So not only will we be able to get those thunderstorms going, and they're not going to be moving very quickly. You see that PWAT there in the right-hand corner of 1.81. That's how much moisture is in the atmosphere. That's not exactly at the top end of the scale, but it's at about maybe 60, 70th percentile or so for this time of the year. So slow moving thunderstorms and rainfall efficient producing rainfall storms so too. So you could get some pretty good downpours. So keep that in mind with some of the thunderstorms a little later this afternoon. Upper level pattern is going to show more of ridging that's going to start to build in here from the west. So even though we're still going to be seeing a lot of low level moisture in place, the upper levels are going to start to cap off again later on in the week. So we'll probably see some lower rain chances, especially over the western half of the region as we go toward the middle and latter part of the week. So looking at the big picture, really what stands out is Chantal, and that moved inland over the Carolina coastline this weekend. Winds were at 60 miles per hour at one time, so it was a solid tropical storm. Dumped a lot of heavy rain. We had some flooding issues through the Carolinas, Southern Virginia. That's going to move out over the Delmarva and then out into the Atlantic and eventually will be absorbed by a frontal boundary. But the National Hurricane Center issuing its last advisory on Chantal last night, but still some flood watches that are posted there, and there could be some significant amounts of rain. Looking a little bit closer to home, winds and seas are pretty calm across most of the Gulf. Local waters, probably 1 to 2 foot seas at best, with those winds generally out of the south. south, and you can see here on the Gulf satellite, not a lot going on. We do have kind of an upper low that's drifting to the west. It's a little bit hard to see here on the visible satellite, but when you look at the water vapor imagery, you can see that bit of a low pressure area just kind of drifting off toward the west, and that's going to continue to slowly kind of slog its way off toward Texas, the Gulf Coast there. And a ridge of high pressure is eventually going to kind of absorb that, and we won't see those lower pressures out there. So nothing going on across the Gulf. We're in good shape there. Out in the Central American western part of the Caribbean, we do have an upper trough that's continuing to work westward. It is bringing some showers and thunderstorms there to the western part of the Caribbean, and you can see a little bit better there how that trough kind of forms right about in here like that, and then you got kind of low pressure in the upper levels that's moving toward the west, so we don't have any issues there. Northern part of that trough, we do still have some concentrations of showers and thunderstorms just east of the Bahamas. Last week, some of the models were kind of focusing in or at least zeroing in on some pressure drops there, but that doesn't look like it's going to be the case now as it's getting more absorbed in that upper level trough. A little bit farther, though, out in the eastern part of the Caribbean, actually in the Atlantic, if you look a little bit farther east of the Windward Islands here, southeast of Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a pretty good tropical wave that's going to continue to move off toward the west. So that's going to bring some heavy rains along the northern coast of South America and then southern Windward Islands. But at this point, models really aren't too interested in that concentration of tropical wave and that moisture there. So hopefully we won't see any development. It is pretty far to the south, and there's a couple of other things that are going against a lot of the tropical development that we'll get into here a little later in the discussion, particularly wind shear and Saharan dust. And by the way, I mean, you can see the Saharan dust on this visible satellite. Big plume coming off the African continent. There are several tropical waves that are currently working their way across the Atlantic, and those are going to continue moving off toward the west. But as I said, really, we're not seeing a whole lot of action coming out of the models, in particular with any of these tropical waves. But I will say in some of the extended models that go beyond 10 days, some of those tropical waves that are coming off the African coast are looking a little stronger, and they might be able to hold themselves together a little bit better. So even though the next week doesn't look too promising for any tropical weather to develop, maybe a couple, 3 weeks down the road, we might see some of those waves able to make their way across. Not really excited to see any tropical development out there, but at this point, there's really not a whole lot to talk about as far as the tropics over the Atlantic basin. So we've said goodbye to Chantal, and the rest of the Atlantic basin appears to be quiet here for the next 7 days, at least according to the National Hurricane Center. And also the Pacific is kind of calmed down a little bit too. We had Flossie out there last week, which was a pretty good hurricane. And then everything kind of drifting off toward the west into the colder waters right now. Low end chance there off the Mexican coast, and then perhaps drifting off toward the west northwest. But anything that would get organized in that particular area normally isn't much of a threat to Mexico, except for maybe Baja. But by the time tropical systems turn that far to the north, you start to really work into some colder waters, as the Pacific Ocean has different currents as what we have here on the Atlantic side. So let's go into some of the forecast details of what we're going to see over the next week to 10 days or so. And water temperatures, as you know, are quite high, and this is the water temperature anomaly showing what's above normal, what's below normal for this time of the year. But all in all, just about the entire Atlantic basin where you would normally see tropical development during the month of July, those waters are plenty warm to support any tropical activity. These numbers are in Celsius, so if you're looking for that magic number of 80 degrees, that's about 86 and a half, or at least on this particular map, that's anything that's yellow or brighter. So you can see the whole Gulf, the Caribbean, and much of the Western Atlantic all have waters that are warm enough to support tropical systems if we can get the right atmospheric conditions. And the next thing we kind of look for is the tropical cyclone heat potential. And what's nice about this particular map is that it is updated every day, and there are some significant changes sometimes. And what this means is not only are our surface temperatures at 80 degrees or higher, but it also measures how warm those waters go below the surface, or how deep some of those warmer waters go. Because as a hurricane or a tropical system would move across an area of water, of course, is going to create some rough seas, which can churn up some colder waters that are farther down below the surface. So, if you've got high heat content, that means those waters are still warm, going down maybe 40, 50, 60 meters. And if a big hurricane or a tropical storm moves across and churns up the water, it just continues to churn up some very warm waters. So, there's nothing to really inhibit it. It actually adds a little fuel to the fire. And most of the time, when we really zero in on this tropical cyclone heat potential, is when you have a tropical system heading into an area, say they're off the Yucatan or south of Cuba, there in the Caribbean, where you have that extreme heat potential right now. If you get a tropical system and the right atmospheric conditions, sometimes you can get rapid intensification, and that can be really dangerous when you have a moderate tropical storm that's, screams its way up to a category 3 or a category 4 hurricane in a matter of 24 or 36 hours. And we don't like to see those kind of scenarios come up, but that does come in the forecast when you start looking at the heat content and the tropical cyclone heat potential that is out there. Now, something that inhibits tropical development is wind shear. And this is a look at the map of the wind shear. When you have high wind shear, which is in the red, you're going to see a lot of these developing tropical systems being sheared apart. And then where it's bluer, that's where you have the lower wind shear. And what I mean by being sheared apart, if you look at the top example, you think of the hurricane or a tropical storm, and it's got that center of circulation that's right there on the ocean floor. There's that center, but then the stack there going up into the higher levels of the atmosphere are nice and vertical, because you don't have the wind shear affecting it from one side or the other and blowing off some of the thunderstorms, not just around the core, but also around the outside of a tropical system. When you have a lot of vertical wind shear, which is what you see here on the bottom, you have that center of circulation at the surface, but your circulations might be offset in different places as you go up with height. And the reason is because that wind shear coming in is just battling this. So you get either a tilted center of circulation or a broken, or it can open the whole thing up. And developing tropical systems have a hard time just getting going when you have a lot of vertical wind shear, so it can prevent some development. And then vertical wind shear can also have an effect on an already mature hurricane by starting to rip it apart, by getting that vertical wind shear to come in. So hopefully that kind of clears up some things when it comes to how wind shear affects our tropical systems. Another thing that's inhibiting is Saharan dust, and there's going to be a lot of that over the Atlantic basin and the Caribbean, and eventually it's going to work its way westward into the Gulf and Central America as well. So at this point, this is going to be one of the bigger inhibiting factors of any tropical development, which is likely why we're seeing the models kind of quieting down. Now, it doesn't mean that something's going to not sneak up here sometime in the next 2 weeks, but with all the Saharan dust and the high wind shear, and the models really just not being very excited about anything, it does appear that we're going to see a week or maybe 2 weeks of fairly quiet conditions out in the Atlantic basin. So real quick, we'll just go through the next 10 days. This is the GFS model, but I am going to point out a couple of things that are actually beyond 10 days that might affect us a little bit later. So don't run away just yet. You see that low pressure there when it gets to the end of the loop. It just started over, so we're getting into the end of this week, starting next week. And if you look toward the Gulf Coast, you see that concentration of moisture moving westward from Florida right there at the end. So I want you to keep that in mind. Just kind of remember that. Keep that in the back of your head, because we're going to study that a little bit more in detail. Euro model also toward the very end of that 10-day period has a gathering or moisture and perhaps some low pressure developing along the Florida panhandle, and then drifting its way off toward the west, bringing enhanced rain chances here as we head toward the end of next week, which would be going into the 17th and 18th of July, so toward the middle part of the month. The Canadian model also shows a little bit of that. That's really the only thing that I can find outside of a little ripple of energy that might be north of Puerto Rico in the middle of this. But As far as the global models for the next 10 days, they keep things very, very quiet. Same with the icon just going out for the next 8 days. So I really don't see anything major. But the reason why I want you to stick around talking about that low pressure is I want to go just a little bit farther out. And I want to remind you that when you go out 10 days, it is very, very uncertain. But I wanted to show you how this trend is going. So we're going to start here at next Tuesday. So next Tuesday morning, you see that little low there over Georgia, and then it kind of starts to drift a little bit farther toward the west. But for a second, you see a little low maybe out over the Gulf waters. That's what I think the GFS and the Euro are picking up on. Now, this might just be a trough working its way off toward the west that could possibly stay over land. But at the same time, you are going to have a lot of moisture. You see all that moisture drifting westward like that? So be on the lookout, not necessarily for any kind of a tropical system, but we could see some tropical type amounts of rainfall looking ahead about a week and a half to 2 weeks down the road. So at this point, that's the only thing that I can see that would be interesting as far as the next week to 10 days. I do want to remind you, though, that the Gulf, the western of the Atlantic, and much of the Caribbean and western part of the Atlantic there near the Windward Islands are our main areas of development. And even though July is still a relatively quiet month, when you look at this graph, July is about twice as exciting as June. And we had two named storms already in June and one so far in July. So the mixture of tropical storms and hurricanes does start to go back up. And by the time you reach August, you really start to see that ramping up. So when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes and being prepared, now's the time to do it. You got about 3 to 4 weeks, and then that's when that more anxious part of the hurricane season comes where you're looking at everything and wondering, oh, is this going to come our way? What do we have to do? What do we have to prepare for? And all those. So if you get that stuff taken care of and thought of right now, it'll be a little less stressful when things really get going in August and September. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. I certainly enjoy our midday visits. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on those notifications. Remember, you can hear my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And also follow my social media pages both on Facebook and X. And thanks to everyone who subscribed to Acadiana Weather Today right here on YouTube. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and I will see you tomorrow morning for Acadiana Weather Today at 7. Have a great day.